In 1 Kings, chapters 9 through 11, and 2 Chronicles 5 through 8, if you read those, and you see how they overlap and parallel each other. In these, Solomon builds the temple. He becomes extremely wealthy and turns away from God. If you actually look in and calculate how much money he had coming in just on a yearly basis, he sent people on ships to different parts of the world to collect. And he had kings all around him that would send him yearly gifts and tariffs and all kinds of things. And he had just looking at that, it was in the billions every year he had coming in. That's not counting the fact that he had horses that he sold. It's not counting the fact of all these other things that were going on in his business enterprises. In fact, if you remember, he made silver so common that it was like dirt. It was like rocks. It really had little value, so he didn't even trade in it. He traded in gold. And of course, the temple was built, which was overlaid in gold. He had Hiram, I don't know how he did this, but he convinced Hiram to send tons of gold to help with the building of the temple. He was a very good and wise king for the people of Israel. And of course, he made a lot of enemies because of that, but they were subdued. He was also wise enough to know how all the politics work. Now, remember, what does the word wisdom mean? To have knowledge and to know how to use it. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about this idea that just because you know something doesn't mean you know how to use what you know, right? So putting it into practice is really where wisdom comes. And wisdom also relates to there's different types of wisdom, right? So there's worldly wisdom and there's wisdom that is evil wisdom, which sometimes overlap, and then there's godly wisdom. Well, the worldly wisdom, if we look at how people behave in the world around us, John tells us that we're not supposed to love the world or the things in the world. But that doesn't mean that we can't know how to use the things in the world in the right way, right? So Solomon was very wise in how he used his finances and things, and how he used his political power and things like this. And he was also smart in that sense of how to gain all that. It was incredible. And so if you're looking at it purely from a physical standpoint, which if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, that's what he actually is talking about in there. Purely from a physical standpoint, without considering the moral implications, he was very smart in what he did and how he did things. And so he was wise. He was one of the wisest kings on earth at that time. And people came from all over just to sit at his feet and ask him questions. So we have the Queen of Sheba that was one of those that came. There's different people from around the different parts of the earth that would come and ask questions, and he was able to answer all of them. Wrote thousands of proverbs, wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and many other things that he did. So he was celebrated for. And so he built the temple. We talked last week a little bit about this. It takes a certain amount of understanding and wisdom to go and build a monumental structure like was built. One of the things that's most fascinating to me is how he fashioned the stones. So we talked about that last week. You remember what he did with the stones? Yes, they were all cut before they were even brought to the temple, to the place where the temple was being built. So when they brought the stones, and these are massive stones, when they were brought to the temple area, they didn't use any tools on them at all. No metal tools were used. They set the blocks, and we're not just talking about they were all square. There were different things that had to have different ledges and things like that built into them, so that would hold supporting beams and all kinds of things. It was a very complicated structure. You don't just one day walk outside and say, "Yeah, I think I'm going to do this." I mean, you can, right? When I was a kid, me and my brothers went out and built a fort in our backyard. We had 3.5 acres and lots of trees, and so we cut down all kinds of trees. We're going to build a fort. And it didn't take us very long to realize that thing wasn't going to stand up. Just because you think, I'm going to do this, doesn't mean you can do it, right? Well, Solomon, he didn't just walk out and say, I think I'm going to do this temple. there was lots of planning and thinking involved. And if you've never done that kind of thing before, it's amazing that you could actually pull something like this off. And he did. Of course, he had a lot of people helping him, but it's interesting. Then God, he did turn away from God, which we'll talk about too. God promised to bless Solomon if he remained faithful, and warned him of the consequences for disobedience. In fact, he told him, I'm going to take away the kingdom from you. It will be divided, but it'll be after your death. Then we have Psalms 136 and 146 through 50, and these are all praises to God for his love, for his work, for his role of creator and sustainer and redeemer, and there's a lot there, but as a general overview, that's where we are. Proverbs 25 through 29 is various sayings about righteousness and wickedness, wisdom and foolishness. He continues on with that. And the thing about Proverbs is this is a section in the book that's not really, you can't really categorize them. They're just a bunch of different sayings about a lot of different things in life. And reading through them, it's really hard to organize them. They're not organized in any fashion that I've seen. They're just kind of put in, and they're all great. But we have to remember, it's just one sentence and you get something else. Contextually reading them together, trying to understand the context, it's pretty difficult to do. But just taking them one at a time is the way to do it. Then Ecclesiastes 1 through 12, Solomon is dealing with the meaning of life and the only way to find meaning. And he ends his treatise, I guess, in chapter 12, 13, and 14, where he said that everything we're made to do is to fear God and keep his commandments. That's what life is all about. And so he went through all kinds of things about building projects and collecting money and collecting this and that and having slaves, having multiple women, all kinds of things that he brought up in there. And he says essentially, it's all foolishness. He did name some things that were good to have in the moment during our time. So it's good to have someone that you care about, that you love, that you a spouse. It's good to have work to do that's good and profitable for other people. So there were some things that are highlights, but even those pale. They're really useless if there's no bigger picture of something that we're trying to achieve in life, and that is to be with God. And so God is the only reason that we have any kind of sense in this world of meaning, and it's a sad world without him, for sure. All right, so were there any questions or things that came up that you'd like to discuss in the reading for this past week? I don't see anybody with burning questions, so we'll go on and look at this. The idea here is we talked about what wisdom is and how to define it. I think that it relates to the ability for us to understand what truth is and understand reality for what it is, and using that reality in the right way, in the best way. And so that's wisdom. And how do we gain wisdom? Prayer and reading the Word, that's right. Now, I would say that prayer is not the only way that you're going to get wisdom. It's one of these things. So if I pray for patience, am I going to get patience? Sure. How am I going to get it, though? He's not going to zap me with it. He's not going to just say, okay, you got patience now. That's not how it works. You pray, Lord, give me patience. He's going to give you things in your life where you have to be patient, right? So if you pray for wisdom, he's going to put you in opportunities and situations where you've got to exercise wisdom so it can grow. That's how it works. So now if we pray for wisdom, there's a little bit more to it than that, isn't there? We have to figure out, okay, I got to use a little bit of wisdom to figure out how to get more wisdom. And so we talked about that last week, I think. It's important. It's good. And I think praying for it means that we're seeking it. We're looking for it in every place. So we've all heard the idea that experience gives you wisdom, right? And we know that that's only true to a point. Because I've met plenty of people with lots of experience in life who weren't wise at all. They didn't learn anything from their experiences. So if we don't learn from the experience, if we don't learn the right lessons from our experiences, we're not really growing in wisdom. We can learn we will learn lessons. You're going to learn a lesson if you go through, especially if you go through pain. You will learn something, but it doesn't mean it's the right lesson to learn. And so the question is, we need to ask when we start going through something. At some point, when we're in the process of going through pain, whether it's in the middle or after it or even before it, if we can see it coming, we are to ask the question, what should I be learning from this? And really dig and think about, okay, so how would we know what lessons to learn? How do we know if a lesson is the right lesson? Any ideas? Mm-hmm.
You start building up guards and walls, and then you don't realize that that's actually what you got out of the experience until later. You start to realize, like, my relationship with other people isn't what it used to be.
Right. You start seeing the consequences later on.
And start looking back thinking, I shouldn't have got that out of this.
Yes. Yeah, and so analyzing the lesson, thinking about what lessons we learned through something is a great way to fix things, because you need to learn what lesson you learned, and then you need to decide, was that the right lesson to learn? And then if it wasn't the right lesson to learn, the next question would be what? What is the right lesson to learn? The great thing about the lessons is if you didn't get the right lesson the first time, if you think about it, you can probably figure out what lesson you need to learn and just apply it. And so that's something to think about, and it's a good thought. It's not always easy, but the book of James really kind of emphasizes that idea. And he tells us in James 1, 2 through 4, to consider it all joy when we fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of our faith produces patience. And patience, when it has its perfect work, when it has its completion, will make us whole. And that's the idea. It makes us complete. But we have to learn the right lessons. So Solomon certainly had a lot of wisdom, and he learned a lot of the right lessons about life, but there were some other things that we need to recognize about him. Look in 1 Kings chapter 3. In his early reign especially, he had humility, he had the understanding, he had enough wisdom to answer the question when God asked him, what would you like? I'll give you anything you want. He had enough humility and recognition to say, I need wisdom. So that was smart. In 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 7 through 9, this is when he requested the wisdom. He says, now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I'm a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous and too numbered or to be numbered or counted. Therefore give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? So God responded and gave him even more than that, but it shows the humility and the wisdom that he had, right? And then we also see from this, if you read in 10 through 14, and we'll also look in chapter 4, how God blessed him. It says, the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said to him, because you have asked this thing and have not asked for long life for yourself, nor have you asked riches for yourself, nor asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. All right? Now look in chapter 4, 29 through 34. God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart, like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all men. Then Ethan the Ezrahite and Heman, Chalcol and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. And he spoke 3,000 proverbs. His songs were 1,005. Also, he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. And men of all nations, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Great man, right? No question about that. And where did all of this wisdom come from? From God, yeah. So he blessed him, and he continued. And the thing about wisdom is the more you learn, the more you're able to learn, right? So it expands. It's amazing when you think about it. And so he learned quite a bit. When he talks about these, speaking of these animals, it implies that he knew a lot about them. It wasn't just, I can speak about ravens and all kinds of things, but just because I mention it doesn't really mean that it's anything important. The implication here is that he had some understanding somehow about them. And so there was a lot of wisdom and thought in the processes that he went through. So pretty neat stuff. And then we have a transition later in life. Now, we don't actually know every detail about Solomon, and we have to ask questions like, where did the Song of Solomon, we have Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and the book of Ecclesiastes that were written by him. Proverbs wasn't written by him, but it was a collection of his sayings. Most of it was from him. So we have to ask, where did those fit? And there's really no indication of where those fit in his life. We have to make guesses. And so what a lot of people have done is thought that, okay, probably the Song of Solomon was early in his life. This is when he was young and in love, and this is a song about the love that he had. And there are some hints in there that it may have been, he may have already had some other wives, but the focus is on the fact that he is in love with one woman. And it's about that relationship. It could have been about somebody else. It could have been just a song, but it's called the Song of Solomon because it means it's his greatest. This is the Song of Solomon. And so it's his greatest song. The book of Proverbs would also, some people have said it would have been early in his life because he certainly didn't act this way in accordance with these Proverbs later on in life. And then some people believe the book of Ecclesiastes was toward the end of his life when he realized, which makes sense, he's thinking back on all the things that he's done and the vanity of everything he's accomplished in his life, and he's kind of coming to the end of his days, and he's realizing, I didn't do so good. And so it could be that this is him, even on his deathbed, coming to a realization of what he has and what he should have had with God, which is sad, but it's a good thing that he came back around to it. Okay, so that's kind of where it might fit. Let's look in 1 Kings chapter 11. (1 through 13). King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it was so, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. He did likewise for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, "Because you have done this and have not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I've commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." Moreover, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. So the ending here is that God is going to tear away the kingdom and split it up and give them one tribe. He can have, his family will have one tribe. Why? He said for the sake of his father David. Why would he concern himself with giving one tribe to David?
Was that because it was prophesied that Christ was going to come through Judah? And that
Yes, that would have been that. Yeah. So this is not because David was perfect, although David was a man after God's own heart. He did a lot of bad things. But God looked at him and made the promise. Remember we said 2 Samuel 7, I believe is where it is, that he gave him this promise that his throne would last forever. And so God is continuing to be faithful in spite of the fact that Solomon has turned away completely. And when there's this division between the northern tribes, the 10 tribes in the north, what's called Israel, and the southern tribes is actually Judah and a half tribe. But it's called Judah in the south, and that's where Jerusalem is. And during the period of those kings of both nations, God is dealing with them. He's still trying to work it out. And all of the kings in Israel were said to be evil. None of them, I mean, they did some things here and there that might be considered good, but for the most part, they were evil kings. And most of the kings in Judah were evil. Well, that's the whole reason we had the captivity. So they all went into captivity. The Assyrians actually came in 722 BC, about 250 years or so after Solomon, and dispersed the 10 tribes to the four winds. And there's some representation of them coming back later, but those tribes were those tribes were destroyed, and the nation was destroyed. And then just a little bit later in 606, the Babylonians attacked Judah and Jerusalem and took them into captivity for 70 years with Babylon, and they were able to come back, and a remnant was provided. And the whole reason the remnant was provided was because of David, because of the covenant that God made with David. God is going to be faithful to his covenant in spite of the fact that we're going to do everything we can to mess it up, and he's going to be faithful to what he says. So we can take that to the bank and count on it. What was Solomon's downfall? Yeah, turning. What did you say? His wives. Yeah. So what lesson can we learn from that?
Starting at the beginning, if he would have copied down the law that every king was supposed to do, not to take from the people, not to multiply wives, but to follow God's law, which they're supposed to do daily, so that way they would never forget or stray, which no king did.
Right.
It would have helped him not stray.
Yeah, exactly. So they were even told in Deuteronomy 6, remember, how were they supposed to treat their children? Not just kings, but people. They're supposed to teach them daily, as you walk around, as you go in, as you go out, as they come in. And, beginning of the day, end of the day, we're talking about God and his relationship with us. And the kings were given even more assignment. All the kings were assigned to write. Actually, they were told they had to take the law of Moses and write it in their own hand and keep it with them every day and read from it every day. And it didn't happen, right? So Solomon definitely would have avoided that. And if he would have listened to one of the commands was not to multiply wives, which he obviously did. I mean, you got 1,000 people there, 1,000 women there. Most of this was probably, it says that he loved them, and I don't doubt that for a second, but most of this was probably political. This is a very common thing that they did back then. It's the fact that he had so many women from so many places. This would represent 1,000 different nations, essentially, that he has contracts with. And here, this woman is a representation of that contract that they have, or covenant that they have together as a nation. So, of course, this is how they treated women back then. But that's part of what it is, and they led him astray, right? How important is it to be careful with the influences of the people around us? very. The closer we are with people, the more dangerous it is in the sense of them being able to lead us in the wrong directions. Right? So we have to be very careful. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have interactions with people who are outside of Christ. We should. But we have to balance things, right? If your most important people in your life are not Christians, there's danger there. And we need to recognize the danger. Sometimes it's not easy for us to see the influence that people are having on us. So one of the things that a lot of new Christians are taught, especially if they're having difficulty with different things, is that you need to find some new friends. It doesn't mean that you can't have old friends. But for example, my father-in-law, when he became a preacher, Carla would say this, so I have no problem saying this, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. He was a dope-smoking hippie. And he played in bands, and he drank. He did all kinds of things that was ungodly, and he would tell people this afterwards. But he came to Jesus and gave up everything, and in order to give all that up, he had to turn away from his friends. And the reason is because they kept trying to pull him back into it, right? And I've met so many people that their relationship with Jesus was so more important than their earthly friendships. They didn't want to take the chance. Now, does that mean that you can never reach people like that? Of course not. But if they're not willing to change and they're not willing to listen, you can't keep hanging around them hoping that one day I'm going to go hang out in the bars with them because one day they'll come around. That's just not smart at all. It's not wise at all. So we have to have a balance, right? Does anybody have any problem or any insights on how that balance can be better achieved? So we can avoid and yet at the same time interact with people who are not Christians? They definitely can drag you down. Yeah, especially when you're coming right out of it, it's easy to go back.
With addictions, that's the first thing they tell us.
So it would depend on the nature of what you're coming out of.
You know,
That's right. Until you can get a handle on it, you need to separate yourself. And even then, you have to go in with all eyes open, awareness, and support, too, if you're going to try to reach those people. One of the things I would suggest, too, is be around people, but not when they're doing sin. When they start introducing evil, you say, well, it's time for me to go, right? You don't have to stay around. People give this kind of implication. They talk about Jesus, say, well, Jesus ate with sinners, he sat with publicans and tax collectors, he ate with drunks, and they even accused him of being a drunkard. Well, yeah, they accused him of it. That didn't mean that he was. He spent time with people who were drunkards, but he wasn't sitting there drinking with them, and he wasn't condoning their sin. So you want to be as available as possible, and then when they start doing things that you can't be involved with, you have to ask a question. One question you need to ask is my presence here approving of what they're doing? Because Romans chapter 1 teaches us, let's look over there, Romans chapter 1. And this is about people who have they've gone to the excess in ungodliness. But there's a principle here that's important, and that is coming in the last verse of this chapter. It says that, well, I'm going to back up to verse 28, just to get kind of a little more context. Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. So there's two things here he's talking about. Not only are they practicing those things, but they're approving the people who do. So the principle here is that we can't present ourselves as if we approve of people doing sin. That doesn't mean that we have to make a huge stink about it if somebody's doing something wrong, but it does mean that we have to ask the question, is my presence here approval of what they're doing? And it may be that you say, it's not, I'm not approving of it. But I suspect if you had a friend who was drinking and you go around, put your arm around them and say, you know, you're a good old boy. I know what you're doing, and I don't support it, but I support you. And I think that this is a good way maybe for you to release stress. What are you doing? You're promoting something for them. You're helping encourage them to do it. And encouragement of someone else to do sin is just as much, you're just as guilty as they are of doing it. So it's something to think about. And I don't know all the answers to everything. So with me, when I start seeing it, if it's starting to looks like things maybe heading in a direction I don't think it should be, I'll find a reason to leave. No big deal. I may say something, but may not. So that's the idea. Matthew chapter 7 teaches us about, this is about casting pearls before swine. And we read that contextually. It can be an insult to people, and I don't think it's intended to be. But he starts off by saying, judge not that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? All right. Now, people usually stop there, and they say, see, don't judge. But look at what he says in verse 5. Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And then he says, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you into pieces. All right, so this is an example here. He's giving us a principle that we need to be selective of the people who we teach. Right? Who do you want to teach? Right. Yeah.
So they're going to be more defiant, which is where I'd say people are trampling. So that's having the proper discernment, because not everybody is willing to hear what they're doing is wrong. Somebody already thinks what they're doing is wrong, and they're struggling with it.
That's very different.
And it's also talking about brothers. So those are going to be people who are more Christian, who are struggling with things, and you're trying to help them say, hey, this is sin. And you need to be coming from a place of, I'm not struggling with that sin, and I'm better than you.
Right.
That is the number one thing people do. Is that
You don't want to do judgment. Yeah, that's right. And that's true. And so I think it was Jordan Peterson. I heard him one time saying he doesn't get everything right, but he has some things he says that's good now and then. He said that this relates to, this is what he said. If you're talking to someone and you're trying to convince them of something and they're not listening to you, stop talking to them. It doesn't do you any good. And in fact, you're degrading your message. So what you need to do is stop and watch them, and they'll reveal all kinds of stuff about themselves. It's good advice. So it doesn't mean that you cut them off and you never say anything to them again, but there's no reason to keep talking. If they're not listening, you say, okay, well, I'm done now. And maybe they'll give some hint later on that they're willing to listen. Don't worry about it if not. You can't convert somebody anyway. The only person that can change themselves is when they decide to act upon what God teaches them and ask for God's help to do that. He will help, but you can't change them. And it doesn't do you any good to get fretted and worried, and we get beside ourselves. Oh, what am I going to say? I have this situation in my family. I'm like, there's something, I just know there's this one thing that if I just say it the right way, everything will change. And they're like, oh, I get it now. It's a lie. It's not going to happen. Don't cast your pearls before swine. Let them come to the realization that they need to hear what you have to say before you say it. And we're looking for people like that too. Yeah. Yeah, right. We're looking for the ones who are looking. And it makes life so much easier. It takes away so much stress when you're not worried about trying to convince every person in your life to follow God. Of course we want them to, but there's nothing you can do about it if they don't want to. I mean, you can be there to help encourage and plant seed and water, sure. But we also know that when you plant a seed, it's going to fall on one of 4 soils, and they choose which soil their heart is. That's the circumstances of life don't choose what soil they have. They choose what soil they have, whether they realize it or not. They're choosing the soil. So we're looking for those people who are looking. And I pray that all the time. I'm doing walks, I'm praying, God, help me find people who are looking. That's all I want to find. And there are not a whole lot of people looking, or yet I haven't been in a place where maybe I'm not ready to find the ones who are looking. I don't know, but there's not a whole lot of people looking right now. I suspect if things get harder, that more people will start looking. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Share a message as far as, well, God says this, and then kind of see how they accept that, how they respond to that.
Right, he's gauging.
When you're talking to people, as we study, this is something I've been trying to do, because it helps you notice people's reaction when you say, I was just reading and you share something. You either see the shutdown, like their facial expression either just totally shuts down, like they don't want to have a spiritual conversation.
Oh, yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
Or
You can tell quickly.
it opens up a dialogue, like really, you start having this conversation.
Yes.
So then
Yeah.
you're able to progress a little bit, and it may not be into, you want to sit down and discuss that. Sometimes it's just that moment that
Right.
encourages them to keep studying or to keep sharing.
That's right. It may be 6 years down the road and somebody else has the opportunity to sit down and study because you planted a little seed. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. And that's a more organic way to do it, and it's a lot less cramming it down somebody's throat and a lot more, hey, if you're looking, here it is, right? We're just asking, man, that's the biggest part. It's not the facts, it's not the answers that they come up with that's as important as the question, because the question forces them to think about things they may not have ever thought about before. That's why Jesus asked so many questions. It wasn't a tactic, it was him to do it. So, all right, we don't have buzzers today, so I think it's about time to quit. I see people piling up in the back, so I guess we're done. We didn't get everything done, but we never do. So anyway, thank you for your participation.